I'm Kaushik and I work as machine learning scientist in School of Life Sciences. And as part of the reproducibility series of talks, today I'm going to discuss on how the AI revolution that we are seeing in structural biology is because of the result of decades of reproducibility and open science in the community. So several steps were taken over the years, as the graph indicates, which led to the exponential increase of data in this community. And the data was also of good quality, and several steps were also taken to reduce fake and erroneous data. And here we are today, where we are seeing a revolution in the field. Briefly about myself, I have a PhD in biophysics from India, and I've worked in the industry for about 10 years. Then I worked at the clinical school of Cambridge University, where I developed algorithms to understand structural biology data. And in the last 1.5 years, I have been working as a staff scientist at Dundee. With respect to my structural biology background, I have been doing structural biology and developing algorithms for structural biology in the last 7 to 8 years. I have handled many kinds of protein data. And with respect to data science and machine learning, I just like data. Love working with different kinds of data. And as you can see, I have worked on different, using different kinds of data in the last years through projects and collaborations. And I have been lucky to work with several different experts from all around the world. So this is briefly about myself. And today we are here to discuss how reproducibility and open science is driving structural biology data accumulation, and which in turn is actually driving the AI in this field, the AI revolution that we are seeing in this field. So all these things are interrelated.
Yeah. So this will be made available, and I know there are giants from structural biology field here in this meeting. So I have to first of all apologize to them very in the very beginning, because I want to keep it jargon free, and I might be using terms which might be technically incorrect. But anyway, if I'll be happy to discuss it in detail later on. And feel free to interrupt, because I'm not able to see Teams. If you raise hand, I will not be able to see. So if I still end up using some technical jargons, if you are unable to follow, yeah, just interrupt. That's fine. So coming to the basics of structural biology, because the data is all about structural biology and how this is driving AI. So to understand very briefly about what is structural biology, we have a protein, we have a sequence, and now how do you go from this linear sequence to the three-dimensional structure, which is the coordinates of all these atoms in these amino acids. So there are three prominent ways: X-ray crystallography, NMR, and cryo-electron microscopy. Most of the structures that we know today are primarily determined by X-ray crystallography. But as you are probably already aware, cryo-EM is also is developing very rapidly as a field, and a lot of structures have already come. NMR has been there for a couple of decades. But today's talk, I will probably stick to X-ray crystallography as the method, because about 80% of all the structures of proteins that we know are from X-ray crystallography. So what happens in crystallography is you grow the proteins as a crystal, and then do X-ray diffraction. It's an experiment. Blast your crystals with X-rays. You collect frames of these X-ray diffraction patterns, and then process it to get what is called as structure factors, or it's also sometimes called as experimental data. But essentially what it means is you get the three-dimensional shadow of the protein. So this is actually our reality of protein, and into this sort of reality, which is the three-dimensional shadow of the protein, we start building and placing atoms in a particular order, in a particular manner. And this is what is called model building. And once you complete building most of it, you actually get what is the 3D coordinates of all the atoms. So this is what we generally represent all the structures and atoms as. This is one of the representation, which is a ribbon representation. So this is what we often refer to as structure of a protein. So this is the brief of this process. But uh, though this is the process, the data that you get here from the entire structural biology community is available, at least whatever is available on the public domain is already available. The quality is very good. It has been maintained for a long time, and it is also available in large quantity, as you just saw in the very first slide. There are about 180,000 structures available as of today. So using these properties of these coordinates, algorithms have managed to learn from these vast numbers, which essentially means that if you have a new protein sequence for which the structure is not known, instead of taking this winding path, which can be months or even years, or sometimes it is simply not possible at all. So it is very difficult path. Experimentally determining the structure is a very difficult path. So instead of doing this, you can essentially predict the protein structure using AI algorithms. And two notable algorithms have come into into the existence in the recent past, which is AlphaFold and RosettaFold. AlphaFold is from DeepMind, which is a Google company headquartered in London, and RosettaFold is from David Baker's lab from Washington University, USA. So these two have shown to be exceedingly well in predicting the protein structure instead of actually determining it. I mean, still determining is the better way, but because you are able to predict it, then you can do a lot of things, and the accuracy has also been shown to be very good. So because of this, for example, right now all the the entire human proteome structures will be made available to start with, which is about 350,000 or so. I mean, not the entire human protein, but I think all the several other proteomes combined together, about 350,000 protein structures will be made available. So I mean, basically understanding the protein structure is important to understand the functions. Hence, the entire biology, the way we do biology and understand biology is going to change in a very big way. So this is all about the algorithms. So now I want to also show you the layout of what I'm going to take you through, because I want to follow this order in the sense, like, in the left hand side there are some key years that I have mentioned, starting from 1971 until 2021, and I will put a star to indicate that something important has happened in that year, and whenever relevant I would provide some citations here so that you can go and if you want to read, you can read it. And I'm not going to discuss what exactly AI is good at and how it is good at, but rather concentrate on what were the steps taken by the community so that we have reached this state today. So the first and foremost is in 1971 the first protein data bank was formed in the USA. Basically, at that time, a few people came together and decided to combine all their or make all their protein structures available through a central repository. It was previously in Brookhaven National Laboratories, and then it moved to other site. Now it is called RCSB PDB, which is a prominent PDB repository. So this is how several protein structures were made available in a centralized fashion. And I will not be taking chronological order here, but I will be taking a different order, which I feel will be good for the sake of story. The second event was followed by UK joining the forces. Now we have PDBE, which is in Hingston, just outside of Cambridge. They joined forces and they also started making all the PDB structures or protein structures available in a centralized fashion. Soon after, Japan also joined, and PDBJ was started to cater to the needs of people from Asia. In this way, a consortium was formed to cater to all structural biologists from all over the world, and that eventually became WWPDB. WWPDB is a consortium of all three repositories. So usually PDB caters to all the needs and users of Americas. PDBE caters to Europe and PDBJ to Asia, but that doesn't mean you have to stick to them at all. All times, you can still use any of them depending on whatever you feel like using. But this is the overall idea of how the repository was set. Then what? Once this was set, so what? The idea is, if I determine a protein structure, if I deposit the data to any of them, then this protein structure would be given a unique identifier, which is called PDB ID. And this unique ID will be shared across all the platforms, all the three repositories. So irrespective of where I upload from, anybody with that PDB ID will be able to download the same data irrespective of where he is from or he or she from. So in this way, there is a constant data sharing between all three repositories. At any given instance, they will have 99.9% same data. They share data every Wednesday. So whatever new structures have been deposited in the last 1 week might not be available, but 99.9% of the data, wherever you download it from, it doesn't matter, it will be the same data, and the format will be same, and the way you download might differ, but the data and what it carries, the information it carries, everything will be nearly identical. So in this way, the entire protein data was made available, which is key concept of this data being available to the entire community. Now, recently, China is also planning to start a repository there. I don't know if they have already started as of now, but I think they will start very soon, probably within this year or early next year. And then something else happened. Just making the data available is no good if the data is not consistent. So to make data consistent, the International Union of Crystallography, it's a body of all crystallographers to represent crystallography as a field. They came up with a policy on how to deposit protein structure data. A lot of key things were discussed. It is actually a short paper, but it carries a lot of weightage, and that actually changed the course of how you deposit the data. I will just discuss a few important things from this. Now, obviously, this happened in 1989, way back. So what they did was they defined as to how, first of all, protein coordinates should be explained. What column should contain what information. How do you call it? You have to be consistent in the way you represent the data. I can't come up with my own way of representing something, even if it is meaningful, but you have to stick to some order of representing. So how do you do chain tracing? How do you represent atoms? What codes do you use for different chains? All these details were for initially discussed here. And then they also made provisions for depositing experimental data, and they also said that for discussing methodology and to discussing the methodology, you could either discuss it as part of the paper that you are publishing for some other journal, or also put it along with your data. So these key provisions were discussed in this, and one of the most important things were they said there was a provision for enforcement to maintain data consistency, which basically meant if my data is available with PDB, it means I have already followed several steps and it will be consistent. The PDB has the ability to enforce some of these rules and policies on my data so that it can be easily accessible for the entire community. So all these key concepts were brought into existence in 1989. And thereon, once the data is available in a consistent way, we just saw that there are several steps taken to deposit the data and make it available. And now the second step is, once you deposit, then how will you retrieve it? So there are also several steps taken to make it retrievable in a very consistent manner. So the first of the kind is in 1995, where the first web browser was brought into existence, wherein instead of downloading the data, which was probably very difficult, given the internet connection in this year, they had the option of viewing this interactively and then decide whether you want to download it or not. So this was a key moment to make the data available for anybody all around the world who had an internet access at that time. So in this way, we saw several key things to make the data available, which essentially meant anybody who determined the structure would now be able to put it and make it available through PDB. So this was a key step in making the data available. And the second important factor is quality. Once you make data available, you have to also make sure that it is the quality is is a better quality, not just rubbish. So in this regard, a very important step was taken by several journals like Nature, Springer, and PNAS, and other publishers, that if you want to discuss a structure as part of a publication, then you had to reveal the data in the PDB prior to your publication. So they would not even consider your papers to be published or even peer reviewed in their journals if the data is not available in PDB. So this made sure that whoever wanted to discuss any structure as part of the biology or whatever they were trying to understand in that protein structure, they had to first make this available in the PDB, and only then the journals would consider it for a reviewing and publication. So this was a very important step in the field which happened in 1998. And then in 2008, another key step was introduced by the PDB consortium, wherein they said not only the data, but now you also have to deposit experimental data. Experimental data is what I vaguely call as the three-dimensional shadow of the protein, which is actually the reality. What you often refer to as structure is not the reality. It is what we have built by hand. So this was also made as a mandate by PDB to make experimental data available. And because all this experimental data was available now people could go back to their old records and see if they have made some mistakes, or if they could correct something, and hence several such corrected and remediated data was released in 2007. At this time, several steps were also taken by the PDB to make the data in much more consistent manner. There were several minor issues of how do you represent various things, and all these was made consistent, and all the old data which was published or deposited prior to 1990 were also remediated at this stage. So from 2007 on, whatever data was available was more or less consistent and easily machine readable. And another key important thing happened with respect to quality in 2013. So the journals previously had said that you have to make the data available through PDB for it to be publishable. But then they also said that not only the data, but also validation reports should be available. So what is this validation report? So when you submit your structure to PDB, PDB will release a validation report for every structure. So every structure there is will have one validation report, which is basically which will evaluate the quality of the structure, how good it is, what parameters are agreeable, or if there are any unusual outliers. All these things will be discussed as part of this log file. This is also actually in a way machine readable, though this is a PDB format. And by the way, this is a validation report for my own structure. So in this way, when you make this validation report available for the depositors, like for the experimenters who want to deposit the data, so first of all, they themselves had an option of correcting or addressing some of the issues. And this can go on in several iterations of addressing errors and all these things. And once the experimentalist is happy with his or her structure, only then they can then release it as part of the PDB and release also the final validation report for review processors. So which basically meant even the reviewers of your publication will have access to not only the data but also the validation report, so that even if the reviewer is not an expert structural biologist, by looking at the validation report, he could understand that there are some key issues. So for example, if there is some outlier, Ramachandran outlier, if it existed, it is not there here, but if it existed, you would have shown something here, which meant that the reviewer could easily see that there is some unusual issue in this, and whether this has been discussed as part of the paper or not. And if it is not discussed, he could raise an issue as part of the peer review process. So all this was made sure by the PDB and the journals, so that the quality generally started improving over a period of time. And then on, when all this was happening, in 2017, versioning system was introduced, which meant the last structure that I published is in 2016, 15 or 16, 15, I believe. Anyway, so now it's been 6 years since I published a PDB structure. I'm sure there are a lot of things that has changed over the years, and my own understanding of structural biology has improved greatly in this last 6 years, which means I can actually go back to my own structure and see if I have done some mistakes or if there is a way of improving my own structure. And once I do this improvement, I need not release it as a new entry, but I can just release with the same PDB ID, which is shared between all the depositors or repositories, with a new version. Like for example, 4MKN can be an ID, 4MKN1, 4MKN2, 4MKN3. So what it means is, when you have this versioning system, you can also see what exactly has changed between version 1 to version 2, version 2 to version 3 as a over a period of time. So you can see what structure, what details have changed at what time, and what exactly did you do to do all these changes. So in all this manner, reproducibility and consistency was taken into account, so that the quality was generally improving. And also, recently in 2019, I mean, this existed for a long time, but in 2019, small molecule, small molecule, or what is often called as ligands validation was put into existence as part of the deposition process itself. The small molecule can be part of the protein structure for various reasons. It could be there during crystallization process, or it could also be a cofactor or some other drug molecule or ATP molecule, etc. So all these things can be easily visualized and interpreted, so that we are aware of any challenges or any problems that might be associated with these small molecules, so that we can validate it better. Once you validate small molecules, it will also have an effect on the protein itself. So it's not like it's not like they are completely disconnected. If you correct something which is wrong in a ATP molecule, it will also have a positive effect on the entire protein structure. So it is interdependent. So similarly, in 2020, carbohydrate validation was also put into existence. So in this way, several quality indicators were taken into account. So previously, what was available was only the three-dimensional coordinates, but soon after, as we just saw, the structure factors, or what I vaguely call as the 3D shadow of the protein or experimental data, was also made mandatory. So nowadays, I mean, not nowadays, since 2007 or 8, I believe, that you have to deposit both of these to the PDB, and this is available to everybody. So this was one key step which improved the quality. Along with this, you could also make X-ray frames itself available. For example, in my own case, for all these 6 structures that I have determined, I have made all the X-ray frames available through other public repositories. I mean, they are usually very, very huge. Like it could be 40 GB, 50 GB. Each data set could be very big. So this can be put in some public place, and they will give you a particular ID, which can be linked to your PDB ID. So what it means is, now the entire pipeline, starting from the experimentation to all possible data that you generate out of this, is available in some or the other fashion from PDB. So this is a very, very big step, because you're capturing most of the data generation as well as data processing steps in the big pipeline of structure determination. And next, because of all these things, quantity started improving also over a period of time. To enable people to quickly upload their data, first AutoDep was put into existence by RCSB PDB in 1996, so that people could directly upload their data in a web browser kind of fashion. And another very important thing that happened in the UK, which I was proud to be part of for the last few years, was existence of CCP4, which is Collaborative computational project number 4. This started in way back in 1979. What this was is, at that time, all the structural biologists who are developing methods, who are developing theory, came together and made this collaboration to share their code and algorithms with each other so that they could be more productive. And there was no need to reinvent the wheel, so that all their work could quickly happen sooner than later. Another key similar thing that happened in the recent past, sorry, in the big scheme of things, it is recent past, which is 2002, was the existence of CCTBX. So CCTBX is slightly different from CCTB4. CCTBX is basically has the same idea, but now it is much more modular. It is a library of several functions that you would need to use to handle all the data of different, the pipeline that I was explaining, from starting from frames until the actual 3D coordinates. You can handle all of these using this Python library, and it is free. It is community driven. It is developed by several people, and it is free for anybody to use. So on top of CCTBX, Phoenix was built. So we had CCP4 in UK, which is a software suite of several algorithms, several programs for people to use. Similarly, there was Phoenix, which started in 2002. There's also another version of not exactly Phoenix, but something else. But Phoenix is now the prominent software, which is funded by NIH, and CCP4 is funded by UKRI. And I have not come across any structural biologist who is not using at least one of the two. Like I'm sure most structural biologists will be using both. If I come across anybody who claims to not use any of these, then either that person should be extremely brilliant or lying, because it is so central. Everything that we do in structural biology, especially in the crystallography part, even for cryo-EM part, there are several programs which will help do several steps in a very consistent and quick manner in these two software suites. And because of all these programmatic and software algorithmic development, software development, algorithms, several algorithms started coming into existence. So it started way back in 1979 to process the data frames, the X-ray frames. How do you capture the spots on the frame? How do you process it? There are several hundreds of algorithms have been developed over the years. Some of them have been updated. Some of them have been dumped, and new algorithms have come into existence. So many algorithms came into existence, which meant you could do the same job quickly and more efficiently. Hence, the quality will also be improved, but also the quantity will also increase. So you could do more in less time. So all these developments happened. Another significant thing at worldwide happened was Structural Biology Consortium. So again, this is a worldwide consortium which started in 2003, which is still doing until today. I mean, it exists even to this day. They started determining structures of proteins in an industrial scale, like several structures every day probably. So it was a huge project. They have deposited hundreds of structures in the PDB, thousands of structures in the PDB, and any protein that you think was important. It could be because of drug discovery, or it could be a drug target, or it could be something very important to understand the metabolic pathway of a bacteria, or archaebacteria. You could request them. You could put a request to Structural Biology Consortium, and they would determine the structure for you and make it available to the entire public. So so in this way, a huge a repertoire of structures started being deposited from this Structural Biology Consortium. And this was made possible, like this industrial scale of data deposition was possible because of all these factors. Like there are softwares, there are algorithms which could all speed up the process. And very recently, again 2014, to maintain all these steps of data deposition, data validation, data curation, when you interact with the PDB, depositors or PDB curators, all these processes were centralized, wherein it is just like a form, wherein you start with the data deposition, and then somebody some human being from the PDB side will say that you have these problems. Please look at the validation report and see if you can rectify. You can rectify it, and this will go on for several cycles. And then once you are happy, when the depositor is happy with it, then the curation is completed, and you can deposit the structure in the PDB and make it publicly available. So all these steps were centralized in something called one dep system. So all these things were happening, so which led to increasing the first of all the data was available, and then the quality was also taken care, and the quality was also made sure. On top of it, another thing was also made sure in the programmatic and software suite processes. That was actually this is not a straightforward process. When you do model building, you usually go over in several cycles. And similarly, how you go from data frames or X-ray frames to generating this shadow or structure factors is not straightforward. You actually go in. There are several ways of doing this. So to capture this was very difficult. How do you exactly capture it? You have to either start taking note, or programs should be built to take care of all these things automatically when you concentrate on your science part, and that has been made available in all these software suites. So now you not only have all these factors, but now you also have what is called what I refer to as metadata. You not only have all this data, but the metadata, which is how exactly did you get this data? What did you do to go from here to here and here to here? How many cycles have you done? What software did you use? What were the finer details? What were the knobs that you turned? Now all these details are already captured as part of the PDB file or log file. And when you upload your data to PDB, you don't need to manually enter this. It will already be taken care internally. So when you download a structure from PDB now, you will not only get data, but you will also get metadata, because there are several ways of actually performing all these steps. All these things will be directly taken care. So you just saw availability, quantity and quality, and also metadata availability. Because of all these factors, there was a sudden rise in the growth of structures. You have already seen this in the introductory slide. This is how the data started accumulating over the years. As you can see, not only the total number of structures have increased over a period of time. Mind you, this is just X-ray, which is about 160,000, but in total it is about 180. But also the rate of growth per year, the depositions per year also started increasing rapidly. And while all this was happening, there's also some technological advances that happened in the field. One of the key technological advances that happened was the availability of what is called synchrotron missions. The synchrotrons are particle accelerators. It can be as huge as 1 mile. It's a mission which is 1 mile, or even 25 miles. So we in the UK we have one in near Oxford. It's about a mile long mission, and they generate X-rays which are a billion times stronger than your normal desktop X-ray machines, which meant data which couldn't be captured during your X-ray diffraction was now available to capture in these very high energy X-ray machines, X-ray generators. And because of this, the quality and the detail of the structures also started improving. So resolution is one factor, one such it's, I wouldn't call it quality indicator, but one factor which will which means that you can resolve and identify particles clearly. So a lower number means desirable, which is better resolution, and a higher number means you can't resolve things clearly, and which is not desirable. So as you can see, more or less in the recent past, the structures that have deposited in the PDB have started depositing better and better resolved structures, which is a great thing. And also to remind you that this is a linear scale, but the effect of resolution is not linear. It is actually, it changes as a function of volume of a sphere, which means a protein which is resolved and determined at 2 angstrom will be nearly 8 times better if it were to be resolved at 3 angstrom. So you have a nearly 8 times jump between 3 to 2. So even a tiny improvement in resolution actually means you can see more things and more clearly. So this is one key thing that happened. As you can see, that the position here is below. Another thing is, because of the automation, because of all these algorithms, and because there was no need to reinvent the wheel, and there was no need for you to redo things and recalculate things. Everything was done automatically for you in these software suites. Now people could concentrate more on challenging problems and not reinvent the wheel, which meant, again, this is a logarithmic scale, which meant uh, uh, more bigger structures were now available in the PDB, because people started trying more challenging projects, which was not easily possible earlier. So as you can see, there was a sharp rise in the size of the structures deposited in the PDB over the years. So all this is fine. An unintended consequence of this was also the peer review of the data. Like, we all know the peer review of publications and articles, but now there is something unusual, which is, at least for me, peer review of the data itself. So in 2006, there's almost a scandal of a kind that happened in structural biology. Somebody published a structure and claimed that it is from human component system, but very soon another group of scientists uh, took this data and proved that the data should be manipulated. They proved it beyond doubt that the data is manipulated. Just to remind you, they did not redetermine the structure. They did not do an experiment. They just took the data and showed, using that data, that the data, this original data is fake. So in this way, all the data that is available was available for peer review. And this was a very sad thing to happen in the community. But then several steps were taken so that this could never repeat. And I believe it has not happened since. There are several structures at that time, but after that, all the fakes were removed, and now it's more or less fake free. However, the errors happen. Genuine errors happen, mistakes happen. So one of such kind of problem was where somebody thought they have determined a human SMN protein, whatever SMN is, but then it was shown that it is actually not human protein at all, but a bacterial protein. And because of all these vast data that was available during my PhD, I had come across a difficult data set, and I tried something called in a search space. It's called semi brute force approach of structure determination. And at that time, I had about 120,000 possibilities to try. I tried one of it, and it was more or less like a needle in a haystack problem, and we determined the structure. The thing was, we didn't know what the sequence is. Like, usually you would know the sequence when you start determining the structure, but at the time we didn't know, because it had turned out to be something which we didn't expect it to be. And then basically I read the sequence from the structure and then determined what this is. And at that time I didn't know that the same problem was also being pursued by a group of scientists from Oxford, and we happened to solve the same problem almost simultaneously using the same approach, and published, rather submitted it to same journal just 1 week apart. It's just a coincidence that I could probably never forget in my life. And both our papers were published eventually. So all this is fine, but then we have discussed several things about data itself. But then how do you judge AI has performed better than all the other algorithms? For that, we should have a platform which is unbiased, which is blind, which is fair for everybody involved. That actually already exists. So this protein prediction competition was initiated by John Mould in the University of Maryland, along with his colleagues, in 1994. So what it means is, let us say you have a protein sequence for which the structure is not known. You finally go and determine the structure, but before you deposit it in the PDB, you actually give away this structure to a blind data set for to be used in the competition, and this will be held for a few months. And similarly, people, AI algorithm or any other kinds of algorithms, will have the same data that is available for the entire world, which is the PDB data. except this new structure which is still not put in the PDB but is held in a blind set. And they can learn whatever they want to learn, and then they should predict the 3D structure of the protein. And then these two structures, now the blind set and the predicted structure, would be compared and assessed. And that is how the performance of all these algorithms will be measured in an unbiased way. And only after the computation will these be released in the PDB. So just to remind you, we are all in the rat race, but several people actually willingly keep their hard-earned structures away from public's eye, and unable to disclose this publicly, just for the sake of this computation. This is a very important community contribution from all these people. So this is how the computation is done, and this has been happening every alternate year from 1994. So in one such computation in 2014, this is how all the participants ranked from best score to least score. The best score is the best performer, and here somebody stands tall, and that is an AI algorithm. And this AI algorithm managed to perform more than twice as good as the second best competitor. This has never been approached, and never been observed in the history of CASP competitions. It's called as CASP competitions. So this was unusual in so many ways. So this is how the protein prediction competition assessed in an unbiased way that AI algorithm has performed far better than anything else that it has ever seen. So what is the learnings from the community? Now, I have already shown, hopefully, that because of the reproducibility, they have seen several short-term and also long-term benefits. I have given several examples of how the fake data was removed, how I could do my PhD because of reproducibility and open science, and also the long-term benefits that we are seeing right now because of the AI algorithms. And because people were not reinventing wheels, they could do something more challenging and more meaningful. That is why open science is also very important. And all this was possible because the community took several decisions over a period of time. They had a policy which was applicable worldwide, and they enforced it, and it was not set in stone. Several times they have updated this policy. Like they initially started with PDB, which was PDB format, which was very old. It was revived. Now it is called CIF format. So several things has been updated over the period of time as and when more challenging technological advances happened. So this is how they achieved it. And for me, for me, what I learned from the community was do science for the sake of science. So coming to the acknowledgements, my thesis advisors played a very important role in my shaping. My fascination for structural biology is primarily because of Murthy. He had this contagious addiction for protein structures, and it is primarily because of him that I got involved in crystallography and structural biology. And from Srinivasan, I learned how to handle data, large amount of data in a consistent way, in a way which can be reproduced. So they played a very important role. And though Saudamini was not my PhD mentor directly, she played a very important role in the last leg of my PhD thesis and soon after. And because I got a chance to work with Randy, who is a giant in structural biology community, I managed to learn a few things from him. And because of him, I also had a chance to interact closely with Isabel, who used to stay for about 2 months in Cambridge along with her entire group. And she is an exceptional teacher. So because of her, primarily because of her, I was able to understand several key concepts and theory behind diffraction and how do you process and various other things. So I'm extremely thankful to them all. And also because of Randy, I had the chance to closely work and interact with some of the best minds from Phoenix and CCP4, and also a protein data bank. It turned 50 very recently. My PhD was funded by Indian Council of Medical Research. I had a fellowship, and my position at Cambridge was funded by UKRI. So in this way, I have many people to thank and the entire structural biology. And thank you to Fiona for starting this and giving me this chance. And you know how to reach me. Thank you very much.